Hello and welcome to the Writers and Books Visiting Authors series. I'm Kathy Sebna, the Communications Associate here. For those of you who are new to us, Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, a bookstore, and literary programming for people of all ages and backgrounds. You can find more information at our website, wav.org. Writers and Books would like to call attention to the complex and troubled history of the lands on which we live and work. We are hosting this event from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as the Seneca people or the keeper of the Western Door. We're so happy to have Sarah Cedeño with us tonight. She'll be joined in conversation by Sarah Freely. First, we'll hear Sarah read, and then that'll be followed by a discussion and Q&A. Sarah Freely is the author of 5 books, most recently Sad Math, winner of the 2014 Moon City Poetry Prize and the 2015 Whirling Prize from the University of Indianapolis. Her A Brief Natural History of Women is forthcoming in June 2023 from Harbor Editions. Sarah Cedeño's debut nonfiction collection, Not Something We Discuss Often, explores womanhood and illness through essays ranging from recounting a reiki healing her family organized after a diagnosis to the discovery of her great-aunt's hoarding when her father inherited her house. Sarah Cedeño's work has appeared in Brevity, The Journal, The Baltimore Review, The Rumpus, and elsewhere. Sarah lives in Brockport with her husband, 2 sons, some old ghosts, and a dog. She teaches writing at SUNY College at Brockport. Welcome, Sarah, and enjoy.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm just gonna, hello, what? Good. Oh, yeah, I can, well, can I just do it like this? Oh, you know what, that's probably not gonna work, because I have to hold my papers. Wait, is that good? That might be good. Yeah, technological difficulties.
No worries. It's a funky microphone. Does that get better?
Yeah, that's perfect. Wow, can you hear me? Can you hear me? That's good. Too close? Okay, good. Too loud? Good, okay. So thanks for being here. Kathy, thank you for your lovely introduction. Thank you, Sarah, when you're going to join later. I'm really happy that you agreed to facilitate this. Yeah, so what I'm gonna do is, I made a set list. It's a thing, it's like the glamorous rock star life, but the writer version. So I'm gonna read just a couple short pieces from Not Something We Discuss Often. And then I have some new stuff that I want to read, just because I've read quite a few of these here before. And so I want to do something a little different. There we go. I can just find, there it is. On the Road's Shoulder. I'm sorry for the table scraps I give the dog when you're not looking. How I scrape the meat sludge from your sauce plate into the dog bowl. How she laps it up because she knows it is deserved, the last of her 10 years on this earth. I'm sorry for dimming the ceiling light you've just blazed on, for preferring the lamps my mother gave me that I nestle in the corners. I'm sorry for having turned my back to you so many nights, for having blamed the oppressive heat and tied the curtains back when you'd rather them closed. I'm sorry for having enjoyed all the breeze that came in through the window while you snored into the hallway. I'm sorry too, and I'll say again and again that I'm sorry for the glass of wine that turns into 4 and into 5 until I've sunken into someone who is not me. That I will make the just jelly sandwich for Sammy instead of slathering peanut butter on one side. I'm sorry not all the meals I make contain a protein. And I'm sorry for the heels of my feet scratchy against your calves at night. I'm sorry for so often saying yes to others that I have to say no to you. I'm sorry for apologizing for things that I continue to do, for dragging what you mean out of you like the entrails of a buck on the road's shoulder. So a lot of these a lot of the pieces in this book come out of Sarah Freely's boot camp. And so, well, there were about 3 of them, and they're usually the shorter pieces. And so that one that was from a prompt based on Brenda Miller's Swerve, which is sort of, obviously you can tell, a litany of apologies. So yeah, that's where that came from. Say for sure. There are sometimes like you get certain things will happen, a moment in your life that will catch you off guard, and it like kind of takes something in your brain that you have to like remember that. And there are some moments that you feel like will turn into essays, and so you kind of put that in your back of your mind to kind of collect the things from that moment on that might, fall into the cup of that essay, right? For those ideas and instances that help support the moment that called up the essay. So this is from a moment in the doctor's office with probably one of the most devoted neurologists I've ever had. So it's called Safe Ashore. You entered the exam room for my first appointment. I don't anticipate your slumped gait. For you, this is just called walking. This is called your beautiful life. And for me, it appears a tragedy that has befallen you just before you entered the door. It is you who enters. It is not cerebral palsy that appears in the exam room after knocking gently. It is you, a man in an LL Bean sweater over a starched button down. Perhaps a father who shakes my hand and listens to my heart, who staples himself on my shoulder while he checks my lungs, an established and respected doctor of the neurology unit, a spouse who needs a new pair of Doc Martens. You speak into an audio recorder instead of typing away at a computer. I see your face instead of the glow of the screen as you explain about the growing colony of cotton-like lesions on my MRI. I am a patient, not a disembodied voice over your shoulder. You are not the stenographer, and I am not your chore. I see your crooked smile and speckles of dandruff on your glasses, your day-glow Fitbit and tawny complexion. You recommend the strongest medication with the side effects that include a rare brain infection that usually leads to death or severe disability. I have let the word rare fall from the sentence in my understanding of the drug and say no. A slick of saliva falls from your mouth to the linoleum floor, and I don't know why, but I apologize. When I realize how ridiculous it is to apologize, I don't look you in the eyes. I want to wipe the suds from the floor with a paper towel from the mini sink. I want to dab your chin and ask you, my doctor, to rest on the exam table if I can get you a cup of tea, strawberry jello, some broth. You don't adjust your gaze to the floor after I apologize. The saliva is of no matter to you, perhaps because I'm in front of you, your patient, and you are a human doing your job, continuing to recommend a medication you will believe will limit my own growing and perhaps inevitable disability. You will leave me glossy literature on the medication, which features a sea of incredibly happy faces and testimonials. Attached to it, a new pen, branded swag. You will give me time. Call me later in the week to see if I've reconsidered the treatment. To you, it might seem as though you are throwing me a life raft. You know what lurks in the depths of this lake. I will be standing in my dining room, having just ruffled my son's hair, for now safe ashore. Okay, so those are the 2 I'll read from Not Something We Discuss Often. This new one. So with multiple sclerosis, it's sort of, you don't know what's going to happen and when, right? So you're kind of looking at your MRI and trying to match up your symptoms with what your MRI says and say, okay, this makes sense or this doesn't. But part of that is just being ready for adaptation whenever you need to be. And so lately, well, I'm going to tell the story in a minute, so I guess you'll find out. This is called The Cane. 1. That the cane was delayed in shipping created in my mind the desperation of needing it immediately. I ordered it half-heartedly from Etsy after many clicks and zooms on the carved wooden features. I'd shown it to my mother, who appreciated the pretty measure of safety. The cane arrived after a conference in Seattle when I fell, slamming my nose and cheek into the crossing guard's toned and unforgiving thigh. There had been a smattering of writers and some families waiting to cross. Do not ask if I am okay, I sent out into the universe. I probably made some kind of guttural, embarrassing noise as I landed. Life's parade of tiny humiliations. I was horrified. I was fine. My knees turned the terrific colors of a sunset and then the yellow-green of a tornado sky. 2. Consider a cane, my fifth and current neurologist had said at my last appointment after we discussed how the illness had progressed from relapsing remitting MS to secondary progressive. So you slow down, so you feel more secure, so people will give you space, so you don't fall. 3. I hadn't told my 2 sons about the cane. They'd been protected from seeing much of my MS, though I had fallen flat on my face twice in their presence, once in the middle school with their friend and once on State Street. I'd always been clumsy, and most every symptom could be blamed on aging, and yet here I was, with a cane I might never need 6 months into 40. I never knew the appropriate amount of concern. 4. One afternoon, I pulled up to my house, and in a mangled box, the cane held up its own cardboard. The boys microwaved a mountain of pizza rolls as I hurried through the kitchen with the box. My right leg had become slow to lift at the hip, a constant resistance, and my left foot scuffed the floor as usual. Over the last few years, my walk had become a source of distraction rather than second nature. Like a running song in my mind, suddenly and increasingly off tune. My brain kept pace in the background, tried to write its pitch. In the living room, the boys fed their faces pockets of scalding cheese and sauce and did not wait to finish what was in their mouths before they asked, "What is it?" Sam, a month from turning 12, he had probably thought, "New hockey stick?" I sat the box on the couch next to Johnny, 14. "A cane," I said. "A what?" Johnny asked, lifting a pizza roll. "A cane," Sam said, chewing. I struggled with opening the box so inefficiently it became obnoxious. I'd expected it to be wrapped in tissue paper, but it had just been banging around in the box. It was fine. Our dog Maisie nosed the cardboard to the floor. I held up the cane for examination, but the boys didn't examine it really, and neither did I. All right. Johnny glanced and kept chewing as if the cane were an unwelcome guest. I'd likely misread his face as something between sadness and rejection, when maybe it had just been confusion. I set the cane down and it rolled into a casual lean against the couch, resting at the angle of ordering a drink at the bar. I became embarrassed I had bought it at all. I worried that people might roll their eyes for how unafflicted I appear. "It's not like I need it right now," I said. Though increasingly, when I was tired, hot, or anxious, my legs dragged like 2 heavy suitcases, and I felt like a weeble wobble. "I might never need it at all," I said, "or I might, and it will be fine." Sam lay, a bridge between 2 couches, head on one couch, feet on the other. He tapped his phone from beneath the Bill's hat. "You're my mom. You're always going to walk," Johnny said, carrying his plate to the kitchen. My legs, little fuckers. Sorry, language. I brought the cane to my office, leaned it in different places under different lamps. I situated it against the shelves holding my Alice Munro collection and against the old green metal typewriter desk where it took on the appearance of waiting. 5. When everyone was at hockey, I took out the cane. Maple, richly toned, carved with folk art suns, a wide strand of diamond pattern, and flowers. I had worried about regarding it as an accessory rather than a tool, but I didn't know why. From the living room, I caught myself admiring it through the office doorway. In shadows, the cane appeared hopeless. In the light, it was fine. It was beautiful. Maisie slept on the chaise as usual, face in my direction. The cane, like a service dog, but not at all. Its handle was a little large for my hand, maybe, I don't know. Maybe it was comfortable. What did I know? At first, I leaned on it, which required some balance. I made sure the height was proper according to the internet. I set it at different angles, arms at 15 degrees for effectiveness. I walked entirely out of sync with the cane. I learned that it could trip like real legs. I tried it in either hand, stepped first with either leg. I tried to coordinate the cane to sync with either weak foot. This would take more than one session. Maisie paced the room with me and the cane. I walked through the foyer, listening to the thud of its rubber bottom, louder than my own steps. When I messed up and started over, I was glad I'd been with Maisie in an empty house instead of trying to cross the street in Seattle. Before the boys returned, I leaned the cane anywhere in the house, against the dishwasher, the window ledge in the pantry, the vanity in the bathroom, off the back of the couch. I was trying not to be fussy with an object at my mercy. Like any new addition, I'd accept it settling randomly, organically around the house. It would be waiting. So also, one thing, I've been working, I taught this class on writing illness a while back here at Writers and Books, and I have it coming up again on Saturday. MJ Ayuka had asked me to do an independent study with her, and she has just passed. So I created this particular exercise as part of that independent study with MJ. And so, probably in the last few weeks of our life, I had started kind of looking back. I needed to write, and I looked back at some of the exercises I had created. And so this is called Thinking About Illness After Reading About Synchronous Fireflies. It's based off of a Lucia Perillo. It's after a Lucia Perillo poem called Thinking About Illness After Reading About Tennessee Fainting Goats, and in which the prompt basically was that you read the poem by Lucia Perillo, and then I had searched the internet. It's so valuable for writers. You can find anything. I had searched the internet for weird phenomenon, right? Like Tennessee fainting goats. So give me some kind of animal or some natural weirdness that happens, right? And so then you read the poem again, and then you just start writing about illness, thinking about whatever weird phenomenon you choose. Mine was synchronous fireflies. This is after Lucia Perillo. What if we win the annual lottery for admission to the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee to watch the synchronous fireflies in the deep dark? In early summer, the flies pulse tiny glows into the clear night, continuous little balloon releases. Each of our brains holds the blink of a firefly hoping to reach the body. Lift this foot, send this thought, swallow this food, eat this heart. Sit quietly, patiently until the lightning bugs begin, our guide, the local says. Light show etiquette. She tells us to face our flashlights toward the ground, and when we do, it feels holy. Beneath us were all golden circles of light. The air blinks, glimpses flicker from the periphery. They are hard to catch with our eyes, and it feels nothing is as it seems. Of course, someone points out that they are technically not flies, but beetles. The local prohibits us from catching them, and so we pretend we never once thought of it. The flash, there and gone, there and gone. There is no absence without first presence, a caution light, a warning sign, the warm sun. A blink, a loss, a breath, a loss, in sleep, a loss. In full catastrophe living, the lights go on and off no matter if you pay the bill, and it's okay to gasp or not. We gather outside where God can see us better and yet see us each not at all. We know. We have prayed in these woods. We don't need to shine flashlights on the ground to feel our own wonder, but it helps. Here we wait for a someday lottery. We seek the bioluminescence of the beetle, a live synapse. Lightning bugs go on like this for weeks, their whole lifetime. This site, a lottery, this site, a home. Okay. This piece is actually excerpt from a longer essay. It's from a piece called The Visible Woman, which is a braided essay of 3 separate topics that you kind of just butt up against each other and see how each topic kind of lends itself to creating changes and impacting the other threads or the other topics you have in your essay. And so in the past, just last year, my cat Mira died. Mira I'd had for 18 years. And so this one thread that I share, I like to read in honor of Mira. This is from The Visible Woman. I was not yet 21, and yet 6 nights a week at the bar, infatuated with X, the bartender. Before long, he would get me a job at the bar selling shots, meandering through groups of students wearing too much makeup and a dousing of cologne. We were all seeking acceptance. I thought it was cool to be only 20 and showcasing a full mock chemistry rack of neon-filled test tube vials in my palm, as though I was part of the atmosphere and not part of the crowd. Sometimes I was even allowed to make the sugary sweet syrup. Sometimes I vomited chartreuse and magenta into the toilet after a night's work. It wasn't long before X and I moved into a Main Street apartment above a bar. My mother bought me a beautiful and incredibly mean black kitten, so I would always have company. She dropped it off in our apartment while I was at work. Having been so much a fan of the Scarlet Letter that I never returned my copy to my high school, and feeling a little like Hester Prynne, I thought of this new cat, who I named Nira, as my Pearl, hurling stones at me. To her, I imagine I was the woman who gave off too much energy, like a golden retriever. Love me, I asked of her. At work, customers would look at my hands mapped with scratches and ask, new cat owner? X would come home from his job in retail with cigarettes on his breath. I would refuse to kiss him until he rinsed with mouthwash. Sometimes X went downstairs to the bar and the familiar bass of Margaritaville would pulse beneath my feet as I thought about what I was doing with my life. I'd listen to Coldplay and brood. One day I tried to walk Nira on a leash, but she didn't react well to direct sunlight or fresh air and walked backwards back through our doorway. Her hackles up. Sorry. X would return when the bar closed, swaying slightly, clicking his tongue, which was a telltale sign he'd had too much. I knew by his intoxication exactly how he would have been holding his cigarette just moments before, gesturing with it between his fingers, his palm face up as though he were a waiter holding a tray, and whatever he was serving had become invisible. It didn't take long. When X was away overnight for work, I removed pictures from the wall that I'd bought from thrift stores or taken from my mother. Glasses from earlier apartments or restaurant souvenirs. Cat toys that Nira and I had given up on using. Books in the shelves, Derrida, Best American Short Stories 2004, Derek Walcott, all moved to stacks on the floor. I had very few boxes, but a lot of garbage bags. Nira yawned and licked her talons while I worked. By dawn, I had dismantled the apartment. I admitted that I would miss the scent of hamburgers and fry oil wafting up from the bar, the bass from the jukebox that had become comforting, how the voices of college students outside the windows always made me feel connected to the world. All that remained on the walls were Glenlivet Scotch mirror from X's father and Italian wine posters, and none of that belonged to me. By noon, X had arrived home and I hadn't yet found a way to move everything out. His cologne filled the apartment like some smoky drug. That I had planned to leave made X cry and me sorry. By evening, I put everything back in his place, a pit the size of a melon in my gut. I would move out not long after, taking Nira with me, using cream cheese and a spoon to get her into the crate and out of the apartment. Nira the cat is 15 this year, so I wrote this a few years ago. Nira the cat is 15 this year and shrinking. She's slightly less mean in her old age, amicable enough to my sons, though she deeply resents our family's 2 large German shepherds. She loves my husband, and the fact that lying on his lap makes my dog jealous. It's unlikely that I'll ever get another cat. I get the best satisfaction when I see she's eaten the chunks of cheese and bits of strawberry I sneak into her bowl, the love that she'll accept from me. After graduation, it happens that college students let their cats go stray if they can't bring them back home. When I miss Nira and her rascally ways, I will feed the strays that sleep under our porch. I used to joke that Nira was too mean to die, but I can see it happening now slowly. Sparse long gray hairs amidst her short black fur and her bones sharpening beneath. She often wakes me at night, scratching the wallpaper, shedding her nails all around the house like soft baby canine teeth. Oh, and that. Again, that's it.
Yeah.
Hello.
I'm so excited you're here. I feel like we're in your apartment.
I don't. We did a few cats. I have to say that I've gone over to Sarah's, like many times over the years. And I never once saw that cat. That cat was like that cat was a ghost. It was like excellent at hiding. I don't think I even knew you had a cat until I have a cat. It's like you do.
Didn't like
So,
keep
yeah.
them.
Anyways, I'm really happy to be doing this. Your book. I've been eyeing this water for.
Oh, I
since
would have
going
just
there,
rolled
so
it
it's
over
like,
to you.
Yeah,
But-
anyways, I want to start first with the at the very beginning with the title. Titles are so notoriously hard to come up with, and the heavy lifting that they have to do, they have to be sort of tease, like come on in and preview of here's what's going to come when you open this book. So could you tell me a little bit about how you arrived at this title and the work it's doing, the heavy lifting it's doing for your collection?
Yeah, it is actually interesting because not like a few years ago, I had sent an email out to the English listserv at Brockport asking, how do you title your things? Like, how do you title your pieces that you send out, your chapters, your stories, whatever you might be writing? And somebody had said to me, because I had no idea, like, but now somebody gave me the answer, and so I can give you the answer. I don't know. There are lots of different ways to get a title, but the one that stuck with me was that somebody had said that usually there's a phrase in the piece of writing that seems to fit and is like an adequate, like kind of concrete or something that fits the piece enough to be representative of it. And so not something, actually, when I sent this book to Allison, the publisher, originally it was titled A Picture of Natural Demise,
Great.
which was
remember that
one of
one.
the essays in it.
Mhm.
And I didn't even really like that title for the essay, but then I couldn't remember, like, it didn't just like flow when people would say, oh, what's the title of your book? It felt like really wordy. And so I took not something we discuss often from Aftermath, which is an essay about Aunt Andy's, my Aunt Andy's hoarding and the subsequent clean out. And it's from a line in the essay that says, this is not something we discuss often. And that was referring to my grandmother's mental illness and probably most things that people don't want to talk about in the family. Like that was just one of the things we didn't discuss. And so I felt like first it was, this is not what we discuss often. And I was like, okay, that's a good title. And then I looked at it and I'm like, what if I just cut off the first two? So yeah.
Yeah, what you're kind of describing is that it's sort of an umbrella for all the, like sort of thematic elements for all of the essays in there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have to, like full disclosure, my book Sad Math, I didn't come up with that title. I went through like 50 titles, and that was a friend of mine at a retreat for full length manuscripts. She shouted it out. I said, "That's it."
Yeah.
But I pretend like I did. Yeah, I did that title.
Take credit.
Along with that, there's this really awesome cover image. I don't know if you have seen it. It's a woman with a tea kettle head. like it's very cool. The colors are so arresting too, the turquoise against the dark background. What do how do you, like see that, we've talked about the title, but how do you see the cover in relationship to the text? I mean, this is like this is also, like part of the theater marquee that says, come on in, you're gonna really like this movie. So, like, why did you pick, besides being an arresting image, that people are going to pay attention to, why did you choose this particular image? How does it fit with the essays within?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that so being like not something we discuss often, being the title and sort of feeling like it is an umbrella, like you say, for the things we don't discuss often, whether that be mental illness, regular, like everyday physical illnesses, any kind of struggle. These are things that we largely don't discuss, at least in my family. So then the image when I was going, so the press gives us a list of authors that are independent artists, and so they will solicit whatever images we pick, as long as they're available. And so I went through 5 different artists' work, and when I saw this one, it like went to a list that was like, yeah, this is potential. I think what finally nailed it down was sort of the era of the dress, and the tea kettle seemed to kind of represent a lot in Aftermath, I felt like, because Aftermath was so full of objects, and I felt like that era, that dress, that sort of, and then the contemplative stance of the woman on the cover.
Yeah.
I felt like it really it made there were a lot that I thought were really good, but then when I came back to it, and I think I had finally settled on the title at that point, and I was like, yeah, this is
So both the title and the cover image kind of rose from the same essay. It's really interesting. I, like when you sent me the manuscript to write the blurb for, which is on the Harbor Editions website, I was really not only was I really, like blown away by the essays, many of which I had read or heard. I was also really blown away by the epigraph that you chose. Could you read the epigraph? That I have a question. Nancy Mayer's beautiful words.
Yeah, Nancy Mears is has passed now. She is a writer who had multiple sclerosis as well, and she wrote about she wrote about a lot of feminist issues. She wrote about illness as she got older, I think more so, but she was also writing about her relationship, her marriage, and the general idea of time. So this is the quote. To view your life as blessed does not require you to deny your pain. It simply demands a more complicated vision, one in which a condition or event is not either good or bad, but is rather both good and bad, not sequentially, but simultaneously. That's Nancy Mears.
They're both good and bad, not sequentially, but simultaneously. Meaning that, like, this is life. It's not, like, oh, it's great, oh, it's bad. This applies, it seems like, to writing about illness, but like about writing nonfiction in general. That any nonfictionist could read this and go, aha, that they've gotten to it. How do you, like, see this applying to, like nonfiction that you've written and that you've read and loved? How have the writers, like, approach that, the bad, good, kind of tension?
Yeah, it's, I think it gives permission, that quote, because I feel like there's a lot of, when you're writing creative nonfiction, usually there's some kind of trauma or trouble or illness or some, like something you're trying to deal with. And people, I feel like, largely push these things down and suppress them, whether we might feel like I did not talk about my illness. I don't talk about my illness with my family, which is why I end up writing these essays, because you don't want pity. You don't want them to think you're looking for pity. Like, I don't really want answers. I just wanted to just say, hey, this is happening and this sucks. And I think that probably is true for a lot of creative nonfiction writers who feel like to tell their story, they're maybe taking up space they shouldn't be taking up. And I feel like with this, it's kind of a way of saying, like, listen, when I write this, I'm not looking for pity, and I don't think I need pity. I don't think my situation in life needs pity. And I think it kind of goes to the heart of that quote, that things are, in everybody's life, things are good and bad simultaneously. And so this is just a way of making sense of it.
We've been talking too about Ann Patch's book, Truth of Beauty, that you're reading now, which is about her friendship with Lucy Greeley, who overdosed in 2001, I think, 2002. And they were very close friends for 20 years and read each other's work, and for better, for worse, this friendship. But one of the things that really struck me about that book, and strikes me about yours and anybody else who's writing about trauma or illness, is that it's not something rote that you just don't take, like a diary and put it down, that this part of the, the good and bad is the art in it. It's saying, yes, you lived it, and now you have to, you have to reproduce that in the art. So it's not just, I'm just going to write down what happened to me.
Right.
I think that's a lot of times the confusion about creative nonfiction. Oh, I'll just take my journals and put them out there and
Publish
people will
those.
love it, and it's like transcending, understanding something.
Well, it's a processing of it. Like, it's sort of the writing aspect. And I think there's a real, they're studying it right now, the connection between the mind and the body, and how writing can become a sort of, people hate the word therapy in the context of writing, but I think when you say writing is therapy, it is probably more pertaining to work that is maybe only acknowledging the hard and not also seeing both sides. I think it's the process. You have to kind of acknowledge the intricacies of the experience.
Yeah, I've always liked therapeutic rather than therapy, because therapeutic seems to get at the kind of the working through it,
It
that
makes
you're going
sense
to
of it in a way.
Yeah, going back to live it again, but you're going to live it in order not just to reproduce it, but to understand it, and come to something larger than what the experience, kind of was, or whatever. I don't know.
I like the way you say understand, because I think you don't have to necessarily make peace with what you're writing about. But I think understanding is something that is probably the most you can get, right? Like how you feel about it and how it's going to impact your life going forward. You pull all these things out from your entire life if you're writing one small essay about one thing, right? And so it kind of lets you contextualize that moment and see how you can continue to move on, and see how you can carry that with you.
Yeah, and essay, it comes from the French for to try.
Yeah.
And it's to try what? Well, to try to understand something bigger. So
Exactly.
I guess this is why I do not write nonfiction. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Which essay did you most enjoy writing, and why?
I really most enjoyed, this is funny because this is all sort of centering around Aftermath. I really enjoyed writing Aftermath. I really felt like it was I was excited about it because it was so much research. So Aftermath is about my Aunt Andy, great Aunt Andy, who was my father's aunt, who had spent a lot of time raising my dad when he was younger, because my grandmother had bipolar disorder and spent a lot of time institutionalized off and on. But he would go and he would stay with Aunt Andy, and then they had this relationship. But then when they found out, the way they found out that she was hoarding, was that she had fallen and she couldn't get up, and her dog had been laying with her, and so she was there for days, and her neighbors had seen the mail building up in her mailbox and had sent people in for a welfare check, the cops in for a welfare check, and they found her there. So I mean, she was still alive, she was not in really good shape, but when they had ended up, she did end up passing, but they had discovered upon entering they had no idea that there had been this amount of accumulation and hoarding. There was like a small, like a narrow pathway that sort of led, and everything else was just like almost to the ceiling. It was just so much despair, and it was just such a tangible feeling of sadness and history that had just grown. And so I feel like with that, I felt like it was research. I felt like I was learning something. I felt like it was coming to understand what we had been dealing with. And I didn't, usually we talk about like distance in writing, how you kind of have to get your space away from it. This piece I wrote like immediately after I was done.
Wow.
And sort of, and also like parts of it while I was going through
Did
it.
you finish it right then too, or did you
Mm-mm.
write a draft and then let it sit?
Oh,
for a
I
while
always
and
have
then-
to let it, I always have to let it sit. It changes over time, but
What? You don't go, I'm gonna send this right to the New Yorker and
no, but yeah, no, I think that one came out fast, and I think it was because I was sort of searching through and organizing this hoard of family history that had just
Mm.
kind of showed up in a U-Haul at my house, and then sorry, Corey, and then we sort of had to you know, deal with it.
I think I remember some of it sitting around, you
Oh,
know, it was
yeah.
a while, it was whittled down,
Mhm. Yeah,
you know, like little by little.
it was a big, and I really did feel like I was getting to know my Aunt Andy, not aside from having this the condition, she called it the condition of the house. That's what she called it in her diaries, the condition of the house. Which
It was a euphemism.
yeah, but I felt like we didn't know this, and so this was like a large part of her that was like, and I feel like undealt with trauma in a way, and I feel like also probably being in her childhood home didn't help, because she stayed there and her mom was there with her, and once they passed, like everything pretty much stayed the same as it was when it had been her house before. So it is a sort of or her growing up house when she was growing up. So like it was a sort of maybe time travel for her. Or
Yeah.
maybe like a sort of past moment that she was reliving.
There's such a huge metaphor too between that and, you know, like the body, the house as
Mhm.
body, and the house, you know, like that she's lived in all this time, just steadily,
Yeah.
you know, like getting, you know, more and more cluttered and decrepit and breaking down.
And so what had happened, what I meant to do, and I kind of got derailed there, what I meant to tell you was all of that to say that when they had read, after my Aunt Andy had passed, when they had read the will, she left the house and all of its contents to my father. And so it was literally like, so he thought he was being punished for some reason. But it was the best thing for it to end up with my dad, because like I'm the historian and like, you know, I'm the
Yes.
one who's like, I want to research and I want to find out,
Catalog everything, yeah.
and I didn't let anybody throw out really
No.
valuable stuff.
No. Final question, which essay gave you the most trouble and why?
Yeah, I was thinking about this really hard, because they all have their own little problems and issues, but I think probably
Children.
the one that yeah, the one that probably made me the most nervous, and I guess maybe then the most trouble, was writing Safe Ashore, which was
The final one and
the
the
final-
piece about
my doctor,
The
yeah,
neurologist,
the neurologist, just because at that point it's hard writing creative nonfiction about somebody else. So like when I'm thinking about like my Aunt Andy, or like when I'm talking about this neurologist, you have to make sure it's focusing on something that makes sense to you, right? Like I'm not casting, I'm trying to understand.
It's the
The
good
re-
and the bad.
Yeah,
again.
yeah. And so I think that I had to be very careful about how I presented the doctor, because he is probably the most, nobody else has ever called me to discuss medicine after the fact at the doctor's office. Nobody says, well, I'll check in with you later. And so I wanted to represent him in a way that showed like the human side of doctors. We don't get to see the human side of doctors. And so when you have a doctor who has a disability, you see the human side because it's their life, right? I mean, we're all dealing with these bodies. And so, I wanted to make sure that that piece most represented him in a fair light and his humanity.
Yeah, it's very empathic, it's that came through
Yeah.
a great deal. So, yes. So now do we open up for questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Dave?
Dave.
So did you always know that this was gonna be the form you chose about this topic of these topics?
You mean a chapbook? Or,
Like essays, creative nonfiction,
oh,
or did you try to filter you? Do you still?
yeah.
Did you mind of this?
Yeah, so so when my degrees focused on fiction writing. And I wrote an entire collection of short stories that I put on the back burner. But this kind of interrupted me, like it disrupted my life in a way that it's like, now I'm like, I have to make sense of this because my body is not my body. Like my body is doing weird things. Like I look pretty unafflicted, but like, you don't realize that little bit, little change, that little kind of off kilter can really like kind of mess with you. And when you have so many different systems that it messes with, I couldn't not write creative nonfiction because I also didn't want to say, here, I'm going to dump everything on my family. And, like, that's not necessarily something that they're really ready to deal with too.
Not
So
something we discuss often.
not something we discuss often. And so these issues in terms of my own, I had written about MS in fiction before, and it was a character of a mother in a novella that I had written. So it wasn't me, and it wasn't even the protagonist in that story. So I was kind of visioning, what does a mother look like with MS? But I definitely think this grew organically out of just writing constantly, like the boot camps, like I said, and just my body changing because I had to deal with it. It like was a disruptive thing. But I always am writing poetry, short fiction. Actually, I've stepped away from short fiction a little bit. It's been a little while, but yeah. Roxana.
So when you talk about taking up space and like the burden and like how you balance that, so this is like a long question because I think other
Sarah's.
We made it easy to remember. It's like, yeah, everybody's name is Sarah. It's fine.
and I think that like that I will say for myself, it feels narcissistic to write about myself. But at the same time, like, when do you decide now is the time to take that? And then to
Great question.
Give yourself permission to take up space. I remember you said in class, we kind of how comforting like depression.
Yeah.
So like, was it comforting to kind of like wallow in that, to say, this is my pages to take up, like money?
I feel like this really divorced itself from a lot of the emotion that I was feeling, because when you're writing immediately, like my mind starts thinking about what are the tangible things, right? And so you end up kind of tricking yourself into writing about emotions by writing about tangible things. right? And so it ends up being like an exploration of the world around you, but really you're working out your demons. It's like when you go to sleep at night and you're having a dream and your psychology kind of takes over. Like if you really can like, remember how in Roxana was in my class at Brockport.
Got
So, but you know, like the sort of magic, like if you just try not to censor yourself and just start writing, like how your mind just kind of will feed you the words. Yeah, but did that answer your question?
That was, that gets there, but it's like, was it comforting? But in you processing it, did you find comfort, even though it wasn't a huge inspiration? Did you at least find comfort with that? That you, because inevitably you get into like personal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I did feel comfortable. I feel okay talking about it because I also feel like there were a lot of things. I feel like there are a lot of things that we don't feel like we can talk about, and women especially don't feel like they can talk about. And so it almost felt good. Like I looked at it, like when I would finish the essays or when I was holding the book, I was like, look at this thing I did, you know, like I'm not going to compare it to cleaning up dog poop in the yard, but I am. I really like, sorry.
It's satisfying.
It's really satisfying to me to clean up dog poop in the yard. And like, nobody wants poop in the yard. And I mean, this is not poop in the yard, but you know, like when you can look at something, you could say, oh, you know, like, not that I know any, like, not that I figured anything out really.
Ellen,
Sarah.
you didn't remember.
Now that it is out, has your feeling for these essays shifted based on how people are reacting to it? And or are people's reactions to it what you anticipated or wanted or need from the others?
That's a good question. I think in terms of, I feel like the essays always could change. Like if they won't because that's where they are now, but I feel like anytime a moment happens and you can go back to the essay, suddenly there's more stuff you can add or your perspective changes, right? So yeah, I mean, I feel like there are ways in which I can think back to the essays and say, oh, that could be in this essay, or that, like, our lives just continue their essays, right? Like we could just keep going with them. In terms of like people's reactions, I think it's been really actually comforting to know how people are accepting and like even interested and curious and wanting to know about how we deal with illness or how we don't deal with illness or how illness impacts people, because we're all dealing with it on some level, whether it's somebody close to us or ourselves, or we will be dealing with it. I think that it becomes a very quiet thing, and I think people kind of feel a relief when they read about it because it becomes a little bit less like scary and a little bit more known. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
I'll ask a question. In the process of writing, did you find yourself getting stuck on certain things and thinking, this is too intimate or this is too personal? Or
That's a
this has
great
to do with
question.
Other people and other relationships, and like, could I be sharing something like this intimate about my body or this thing about this other person
Yeah,
who exists in the world?
absolutely. And I also am thinking about it too in terms of my sons who are very much out in the world now. And so I kind of have to be aware of where those boundaries end. And I think in terms of the body and talking about the body, there was one essay that isn't in this book and I didn't read today that really pushed my like boundaries in terms of like how much I would reveal personally about myself or my experiences. And I had to, it's one of my favorite essays. but I think, and because it was like really high stakes, some of the material in it, and so I feel like that, I felt like the payoff. By the time I was done writing it, I felt like I had come through something, you know? And so whether that means that I share this really intimate, embarrassing detail, right? It's sort of, is it awful to say it's sort of like a confessional? Is it like, I feel like, you know, it's there in my mind and I feel like it has a place somewhere on the page because it's a part of the story, just like anything else would be part of the story, just because it's intimate and personal and embarrassing, or I wouldn't do that if it were anybody else's, like very intimate moment, like to explode. But I think that when I wrote those moments, I felt like I had achieved like, okay, like I put that, I found its value, you know?
You were able to articulate it, but you didn't put it in the book because maybe you weren't ready for people to see it.
That essay I had not finished by the time this book came out. So I do have a larger collection of essays that I was thinking about working on conceptualizing when Sarah told the publisher that I had a chapbook that I didn't have. And
You build
so-
it, they will come.
And so, yeah,
You did
so
do
you
She goes,
did.
oh, send it to me. And I like,
I'm like,
you
Sarah, I
have the
don't have
weekend,
it. I
get
don't have
it
a
together.
chapbook. Yeah, so it didn't make it into this. Plus also it was kind of, it wouldn't have fit in this. It would have outweighed it, like heaviness, and it wasn't quite a part of like this sort of narrative that I was like, although it could be, I guess, but it was a long piece.
I know that when I, like written things in poems that are sort of out there, I always, it's a persona. And then when somebody says, did that really happen? I go, nah, that was my sister. Yeah. Really? Yeah.
Why not?
Thank you very much.
Thank
This was
you.
so much fun.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody
you.
for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming in. Thank you to Sarah and Sarah.